Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. This is episode 400. I am stoked to get this started. I mean, we got Steve, we got Chris, we got Seb, we got Shaun. This is going to be an awesome conversation. So while I am excited, y'all should be doing the same. Like the show, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, do all that good stuff. Get your emails whenever we go live, which is, of course, Fridays for The Collective and Wednesdays for The Gold Mine. Now, we're going to be getting into the tools in our toolbox. And I think it's just kind of apropos that used to be the name of my podcast. And I am stoked to get this started. So let's get some intros and then we'll get right into the convo. Steve, you're on top. 10, 15 seconds. Who are you? Where you come from? All the good stuff.
Steve Seapker. Currently, I'm a screenwriter. I'm a former Marine. I'm a retired homicide detective, and had the privilege to be on the Collective a couple times and the Gold Mine once, and happy to be here.
Awesome. It's always fun having you. Chris, give us a quick head rundown of who you are, where you come from, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So, hi, thanks for having me. Chris Frueh. I am a clinical psychologist, been working with military folks for over 30 years professionally. Never served myself, but was in VA, and past decade or so been working almost exclusively with military special operators and first responders. And I'm at the University of Hawaii as faculty.
Bam. Love it. Seb, I guess we don't really need an intro. You're 95 some odd episodes in. We're doing pretty good. Shaun, how's the mountain street new?
Things are good up here. Really looking forward to this conversation. I mean, it's a big deal that we've managed to kick out 400 podcasts in such a short period of time. But more importantly, I do want to call out, it's not the number 400. It's the hundreds of cool guests that we've had within that 400 podcasts. That's where I'm shining the spotlight today. So thanks not only to the panel who's on today, but for everyone who showed up over the past and brought the freaking wisdom.
100%. We are at 200 and change right now. Unique guests. We are just about to breach 800 guests total in terms of all of the people we've had on. It's been so much fun doing this. So let's kick this off right off the bat. Tools for the toolbox. The biggest question I have right now, and I just want to hit you guys first with this, is what is your go-to? The first tool you tend to reach for when you face challenges or difficulties or adversity, and why do you think that became your top one, your the top of the ladder there? Steve, I'm going to hit you first. What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I hate to just list one, right? I feel like I have one process now. I wouldn't say one thing, right? It was always in the past, it was always some sort of physical activity, right? Usually getting out in the ocean, or getting a good hike up in the hills or something like that. But I think as it evolved, now it includes not only physical activity, but the breath work kind of stuff, a lot of cold plunging, a lot of sauna, and I really, really dig a float tank. And that kind of helps me when those cortisol levels kind of jump up and things get a little stressful and I'm having a hard time kind of sorting things out in my head, and I need to kind of let the kind of silt settle to the bottom. Those are kind of my tools or my process.
I love it. That's a great start. Chris, how about yourself?
Prioritize sleep. My sleep routine is I try to be very consistent, and I find that when you do everything to improve your sleep and to prioritize your sleep, and that can include a lot of the things that Steve just talked about. I'm gonna take a nap in the afternoon if I can. Many days, I'm going to keep a very regular sleep schedule. I'm going to pay attention to the various things that affect my sleep. And so that does include stress, and that includes worry, cognitive mindset kinds of issues, alcohol minimization. Very clear correlation, for me at least, between any alcohol and terrible sleep. So yeah, in fact, I have a wearable that I bought for my workouts some years ago, and discovered all I use it for is sleep. and then the attendant recovery with that.
Yeah, it's a fantastic tool. Seb, what's your number one?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a number one. I have an amalgamation of them, kind of like everybody else. And you know, I'll generally try to tap into the sort of the four pillars, right? Like I'll try to get something done in the social, and the emotional and mental, in the emotional realm, and in the physical realm as well. So go out. If I have too much energy to self-destruct, so to speak, if anxiety hits or adversity hits or anything, and I have too much energy, I don't optimize how I process information. So I like to be a little bit tired. So I like to go out and do something physical, so I can take a little bit of the excess edge off of my character, because I know that that's something that sometimes can be problematic. Now, second to this is I need to get into a deep introspection. What is happening and what do I need to be doing? And so, the way to do that for me is to connect with nature. So I will go out and just like, a lot of people on the panel here, and go for hikes and bring my dog along. And if I feel like I need to go deeper, I won't bring him, so I don't have any distractions. And I will try to sort of go where there's running water or anything that I can ground with or connect with, and really spend the time deciding what is my action plan here, and what meaningful things can come out of whatever it is that's occurring right now. And then once I get out of the woods, generally I'm a different human. I'm generally a lot more prepared for whatever it is that needs to be enacted in terms of the plan of action that I came up with when I was in there.
I'm liking where this is going. So awesome. Shaun, what's your number one? Do you have one?
Yeah, I don't have a number one. And I haven't been giving it a lot of thought as I've been listening to the guests, because I'm generally trying to embrace the idea of let information come in, not dwell on clinging to a word or a sentence or an idea from the guest, just let it come in. And then when it's my turn to talk, I just let it flow out, whatever I've got to say. And I don't know where it comes from. So I'm trying to be mindful in the moment. I'm trying to be present in the moment. But when I come up with a significant challenge in the moment, what I try to do, maybe my number one tool, is curiosity. No matter what's happening, if there's many operating states that you can default to, or I can default to, but if I choose my number one default mode as I'm curious about this, even if it's hellacious, even if it's bonkers, even if it's untenable, curiosity will often get me deep enough into, I'll call it the problem, so that I start to operate in a 360-degree void. And that satisfies my intellectual inner drive to figure the world out around me. And so my first tool is to have an adventurous spirit or a curiosity about life or the moment, so that I'll step into it, and then I just freaking figure the rest out. And I might not figure it out well. I might not figure it out the best. It might not be the most efficient and effective way that I could have if I would have sat back and just done some planning, being strategic or being tactical. I do that as well. But if I'm being honest, curiosity and maybe lack of fear to be curious is what solves a lot of significant challenges for me.
This is really interesting. It seems like there's a kind of a correlation between everything everybody's saying. It's like intentionality. Is that when things start to not work, or things to start to seem like they're going bad, it's to intentionally do something, to go out in nature or go be physical. I know for myself, just physicality is such a big thing. I need to run, or I need to ruck, or I need to hit the jujitsu mats, or I need to do something physical. I need to do construction. Anything that I can get tactile with, that's a big one for me, but it has to be an intentional choice versus not. You got any, let's go around the table again and get some additional thoughts. Steve, I'm going to hit you up. What do you got? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I liked what Shaun was saying there about dealing with the fear of it, and it, like, continuing to be curious about, hey, what I'm feeling and what I'm experiencing. One of the quotes that kind of ran with, like, I collect quotes. I read a lot, and I think, as we all do, and collect things that inspire me or whatever. One of the things that I found somewhere on the internet couldn't begin to tell you who to attribute it to, but someone had said, fear's a mile wide, but it's only an inch deep. So I like to, when I feel fear and anxiety, to bias for action, right? Like, because I find when I act, there needs to be a moment or a process of intentionality, like that planning, that tactical and strategic piece. But also the wisdom to know that no matter how much planning you do, it's never going to be perfect, right? And no plan survives first contact anyway. So, act. Once you start moving and taking action, then you start to gain that forward momentum. And, you may not end up in the direction that you first set out on, but you're certainly going to be a lot better off than where you were.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Chris, you got any additional thoughts on this?
Well, I do. I think what we're talking about, and as we went, the original question was, what do you do when you're struggling? And I think the answers that each of us gave is relevant for that question, but also that intentionality is partly what keeps you from getting to that point of crisis or of being deep into the struggle. So by prioritizing sleep or physical activity or curiosity or getting outside, these are grounding approaches that keep you from going too deep into the struggle zone, the red zone. And I love what Shaun talked about with regard to curiosity. I think there's actually a social science to curiosity. And one of my former mentees, a psychologist named Todd Kashdan, has written a book titled Curiosity, where he brings all that research together and sums up how powerful curiosity is for protecting us. And as a mindset, it's really, it's a growth mindset, because you're not approaching anything with a strong reaction. You're learning, you're listening, you're trying to understand something. And I think what I tell my students when I'm teaching is I try to emphasize to them the value of curiosity combined with humility. And I heard that underlying what Shaun talked about. When you don't know how to approach a situation, when you're in an unfamiliar situation, when you're trying to negotiate or work with somebody that you're not sure how, stay curious and stay humble. And the answers will appear. People will explain to you and you will learn.
All right, I love that. Seb, got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love the curiosity piece too. I never think of using this word. Always use exploration, but that's exactly what it is. It's just going, like a bison, face the storm and turn right into it. And I think that it takes a lot of for me anyways, it takes a lot of the emotional reactions out of what needs to be done. I will acknowledge emotions as it unfolds and realize that it triggers something in me, and I will kind of set it aside and go into exploration as far as finding ways in which I can engage in this process. And I really like this word, excuse me, the word engagement, because you can go through life on autopilot almost everywhere, and you haven't seen anything, you haven't been grateful for anything, you haven't really understood the things that you're engaged with. You just kind of fly by the seat of your pants. And there is a time for that. But I do believe that addressing life with curiosity and engagement changes everything. Now, all of a sudden, you're a part of the solution. It's not all these external factors are hitting me and I'm in victimhood. It's like, no, what can I do to make this better? And how can I engage in this process so that I optimize myself? And this is one of the things that I will always revert to and ask myself that question. Am I trying to control external factors, or do I have my internal factors optimized? And I think that, if I have my internal factors optimized, what's occurring externally is a lot less egregious.
That is very true. Shaun, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to work with what Seb just said in respect to the buffalo or the bison facing into the storm or facing towards a storm. And what it brought to mind is a vision of maybe it's a single buffalo or a single bison, but more often than not, it's typically a herd. And so when you consider that, or when I consider that, and using what I'd stated earlier about curiosity or an adventurous mindset. I don't think it's enough to be simply curious and step into the void and then figure it out on a one-dimensional level. I think that you've got to consider it on a three-dimensional level. So using the buffalo is facing into the storm, but that's not enough. The buffalo should be asking itself, why? Why am I facing into the storm? When did I learn to do that? Why is everyone else around me in the herd facing into the storm? Why is the herd a herd? Why am I involved with it? Why do storms occur? And so those deeper, kind of more expansive, curious mindsets are what I really enjoy for myself. And so again, for me to step into a void, I'm not only interested in the void, but I'm interested in the deeper questions as to what is a void, and is everyone facing voids, and do my voids intersect with their voids, and so what is the purpose of voids? So when I'm curiously stepping into something, it's not a one-dimensional step, it's a three-dimensional step. And further to that, if I am in a void, at some point I'm going to face some degree of adversity. And as we just came out of a podcast discussion about adversity, I stated that I prefer to rely on the hardships that I've faced in the past that I know have set me up for the present, and the fact that no matter what the future brings, it can always be worse, of course, as we've always said in the military, man, it's bad right now, but it can always be worse. I've said that so many times and faced that moment so many times that I believe at my core that no matter how bad it is in the immediate future, I'll figure it out, because that is my pattern. My curiosity stepping into a void has allowed me to observe enough voids that I've patternized my response, I've patternized the world around me, and I can default back to understanding the way I see the world and how it unfolds for Shaun makes sense to me as I face difficulties. I know I'll get through them.
This is really interesting because one of the things that it's caught in my head is the fact that we've discussed something from different angles of the same thing. So the fact that Seb, thinks of it as exploration, and Shaun, you've said it, adventurous spirit, and versus being curious. And I know I had a kind of almost a butting of heads with my psychologist at one point because I didn't like the word curious. I found the word fascinating. I would get fascinated by things a lot more palatable, I guess. And I find it interesting just how the language that we use, whether it fits, we're still doing the same thing. It's just the language in our own heads that kind of work here. And I have a couple comments here, and then I want to get right back into that the conversation about the void here. I just want to hit on these before we get too deep into this. James Mowat jumped in here. He said, you guys bring the information that people need to hear. Thank you. Please continue to do a great job. Great dad gear. Great day, gents. Looking forward to today's discussion. And then he has a question here that I want to touch on. What I'm gathering from everyone is that there's different approaches depending if you need to break contact from the challenge to stop and think before engaging. Does that sound about right? To narrow things down, does the challenge require immediate attention, or can we take our time to address the challenge? Different challenges require different tools. Any thoughts on that? Chris, I'm going to hit you first on this one. What do you think?
Well, psychologists like to say it depends. So I'll go with that tried and true response. Does it require immediate attention? It depends. Is it a bear coming down the trail to me? Yeah, I might be curious about that, but not for very long. I'm going to make a pretty quick decision probably. But I think being curious, staying curious means you're going into an interaction or a situation with an openness and a willingness to hear and learn. You're not preset on an answer. I'll give an example, professional example. So early in my career, early 90s, I was working at the VA as a clinician. And I was young. I was 30, 28, just got my degree. And my patients were all 15, 20 years older than me or more for the most part. And almost right off the bat, every new patient I would meet would say, well, you're not a veteran. How are you going to help me? You don't know anything about me. You don't know anything about war. And I was like, right, that's true. I mean, you're absolutely correct. I don't know anything other than what I read in the history books. So help me learn. And so rather than, there is this impulse or this instinct for people who think they're experts to come in with certainty and to come in with what is arrogance, really. Like, I already have the answers, so I'll listen to you a little bit and then I'll tell you what's real. So I really try not to do that or to be that way as much as I can. And I fail frequently. I fail frequently because sometimes that urge to interrupt or to interject is just too strong. I hope I'm able to come back from it when I have done that.
Yeah, I feel you've done that many times. Steve, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's interesting because like Chris had said, I mean that's another famous law enforcement phrase too. It depends. Well, and I agree, it does depend. But the one thing that I can say is that by focusing, at least for me, by focusing on if I find there's this challenge or adversity or what have you, by focusing on my internal processes, which Seb mentioned earlier, right? My those internals, if I focus on my internal factors rather than these external factors, and I focus on that internal process that I have with managing elevated anxiety or stress levels, right? My sleep stuff, my physical activity, all that kind of stuff. It gives me the space, right, to actually really think through that problem and be curious, and find, as we say in the military, right? There's always a way, right? And we find that way, and that's another thing that I lean on as well, right? Like, I've always been taught that there's always a way. You might not be able to see it. You might need a little space to see it. So I think the situation, to Great Ag Gear's question, unfortunately, it does depend. But I think if you focus on those internal factors and you're managing your anxiety levels and your cortisol levels and that sort of thing, it gives you the space and clarity to see what you're really facing. Because a lot of times, we get smacked in the face with some sort of challenge or adversity. And it kind of overwhelms us, right? It's like being in the surf zone, like trying to take your Zodiac through the surf zone, and you kind of misjudge it and you get flopped on your head, right? And next thing you know, you're like in this washing machine and you can't even come up for air, right? And I think our internal processes that we've all talked about, everyone on the panel has their own individual kind of routines that allows us to kind of take that minute, bounce off the bottom, and get that breath of air, and then think through the problem. That's my perspective.
Love it. It's a standard answer on the collective too. It depends.
Yeah.
Although
in life, right?
I agreed 100%. The interesting part about that is that in that exact example, your boat flips and you're in the water and you can't breathe, and you try to immediately fix that by inhaling, that's going to exacerbate the problem just a little bit, I think. So,
a little.
It gauges, right? So you got to have to manage patience as well as immediacy. Shaun, thoughts on this? You're muted still. Technology.
Sorry about that. I do have some thoughts, and I think that the general question is not specific enough to give a definitive answer, and so it really does depend in this instance. What I can say, I suppose, is I think a good way to look at this problem for Gray Man Dad or Gray Dad Gear is consider researching a little bit of game theory. Look into game theory. And so game theory is a great mathematical way to consider the problem in front of you on a timeline to intensity basis. And so the immediacy of the moment versus the non-immediacy, and the timeline that you have in front of you, the outcomes that you need to produce or expect. Game theory can provide a little bit of oversight in this. Now, I'm not saying that anyone should run their life like a mathematician, or you should consider the world around you as 1 + 1 = 2. Game theory is a lot broader than that. And the reason I mentioned game theory is because recently when we did the podcast where the guests were special operations, everyone was in special operations, I'd propose that I think some of the best game theorists in the world are characters who are in tier 1 or elite units, because they have done so much game theorizing. They've done so many reps in a day, and then immediately gone into after action reports and immediately looked everyone in the eye and said, that's not satisfying. We need to do it better. By repeating that pattern until everyone is satisfied, it creates a rhythm of understanding amongst a small group of people in adverse conditions, where there's far less talk, far more action, and a little bit of telepathy, for lack of a better term. And so with enough velocity, enough intensity, enough adversity, and with enough people who've worked together for a period of time, the game theory disappears. It simply unfolds. And so I believe if someone wants to understand how your immediate attention or take time to face the challenge scenarios, if you could start hanging out with elite operators to see what they do in the moment, to see how they think, to see how they talk about this, to see if they blink their eyes twice to do the math, or they simply keep their eyes open and move into the void and let it unfold. Game theory is a great vehicle to start thinking about the world around you, to start doing better math in life.
What do you got, Chris?
Well, I was gonna build on top of that a little bit, which is to think about the, and I agree with what Shaun said, and think about the parameters that special operators are working under, and I'll include many, tactical response, law enforcement in domestically, as well as other first responders. But think about their jobs. Think about the parameters of what they're asked to do. They're asked to solve very complex problems, and they're not given, a specific order on how to solve a problem. They're given an objective. The objective is X, say rescue this hostage, or find this individual, hit this target, and accomplish this goal. They're not told how to do it. They're just told what the objective is. So they have to be problem solvers. They have to apply variations of game theory. So what's kind of interesting about that comparison or the example, special operators, is they have to think outside the box. They have to work outside the box. Most of us in our daily lives don't have that opportunity or that permission. We have bosses that say, you will do this, you will do this, this, here's a schedule, here's the 10 things that need to be accomplished today. We have this in our home, I don't have a whole lot of complexity in managing my home. It's like doing the laundry, cooking the dinner, cleaning the dishes day to day. There's not a whole lot of opportunity to really need the game theory approach. But when you do, it's almost like it's like a mindset to sort of glide effortlessly into that way of thinking.
Yeah. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
I do. I'll make an analogy. I mean, if anybody who's ever controlled chaos in a tactical settings, will understand this analogy, and if you haven't, we'll make sure that you do. So you have your risk assessment, right? That's ongoing, and you have active and dynamic situations that are occurring. And I like to have an immediate action plan for whatever is right in front of me that I need to respond to right away, i.e. a bear. Is this a grizzly? I'll be climbing. Is this a brown bear? I'll be making myself bigger. Is this, whatever it is that the bear that I'm faced with, there will be a measure of planning, even if it's an immediate action. It's very rarely that we are 100% responsive, that you need to do something immediately. And if that's the case, then just hope that your training or previous experience, and it's half luck, half preparation, really, at that point. But most things, you have a little bit of time. Now, the more you do it, the faster you process complex information quickly. And so that's something that will eventually become a muscle that you are training, and you eventually can make really sensible decision in very short timeline, in compressed timeline. Now, when you have an immediate action, you still have a deliberate being worked out in the back. So if you are looking at a hostage scenario, for example, you will be setting your immediate action teams up so that they're ready to interfere with loss of life and limbs. But you will also have your team that's preparing a deliberate plan of action in how to address this. You're going to do essentially the same thing. You may have to launch your IA, but once once you're done with that, and once you've engaged, now it's going to be pursuing a deliberate action plan, whatever that looks like, because there may be additional actions that need to be taken in order to help you through whatever challenge that you have. And so, it's a quick tactical pause and a consideration for what it is that's consists of the totality of your circumstances right now as you stand, and what are my options, and what am I going to choose to engage in. If there is additional work after, you will have time, most likely, to formulate what the plan of action going forward is going to be. And once this is all said and done, you're going to be reassessing all of this so that you can draw upon that experience in future experiences. And so next time that something happens, you will have even more, a deeper pool of skills, knowledge, and abilities and experiences to tap into, to see where it is that you should be going and how you should be doing better.
I like it. It seems like the concept of having it, not needing it, right? Like you build these tools for the off chance that you might need it some point. But at the same time, you need to have a go bag right now. Like I was just thinking of when we do a load drill, right? The action goes to the rear and you do your load drill, but you don't want to do that every single time. You want to be able to top up your mags as you go through an environment, right? You never want to leave yourself that every single time you got to run dry before you can carry on with a mag change. So I think it's a really neat corollary. And to that point, I want to ask you this one, is that there's going to be times where, the tool or whatever it is that we have doesn't work the way we thought it was going to work in that situation. And previous experience said it was going to work this way, and it didn't. Then what? Can you guys think of a time when you used one of your tools and it just came out pear-shaped, and then what did you do from there? I'm going to start with Seb this time. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's actually happened or that I'm conscious of it, happening recently, but let's call a spade a spade. If I decide to go walk in nature to introspect and do all the good stuff that I like to engage in when I'm in nature, and I'm faced with a grizzly, that backfired massively, So now you found yourself in a situation that obviously isn't optimized for what you are looking at doing. But I think that, having the ability, we always hear this: don't fall in love with your own plan. It's important to have the mission statement and goal, like what it is that you are trying to accomplish, but don't fall in love with how you are going to accomplish it. Like, fall in love with researching and being curious about what you can do, or what are some of the options that you can employ to address certain issues. And I think that, there's a variety of different ways to do this, but being surrounded by a bunch of savages really is awesome when something like this happens. If time allows for it, by all means, bounce it off, a couple of your savage friends, and see what could possibly help. And I mean, that is in a case where you necessarily don't have all of the technical tools that you might need, and you're still sort of developing that toolbox, you know, you're going to have a tendency to do that more. Then once you start really tapping into those subsystems and really being proficient at adapting on the fly and reframing your response, you will need less of that. The more it goes, the less of that you're going to need, because you're going to have these internal tools that you can use. But there's absolutely nothing wrong if there is a lack of technical know-how, or if there is a lack of understanding of certain principles, or if time is compressed, to go out and have that conversation with people that you truly trust and perhaps even look up to a certain extent.
Absolutely. Lean on the circle a little bit, right? Shaun, I'm going to come to you on this one next. What do you think?
I'm going to touch on the previous question, then I'm going to jump into this. And it's in respect to what Gray Man Dad was talking about, when you've got a challenge and how to address it if you don't really know how to address it. Well, I had the luxury of being taught how to do that properly. I didn't know how to do it when I was a skinny, underperforming kid in high school. And then I joined the Army. And then the Army taught me how to do these things. And it taught me through a process that I've taken on and called it in my head, the process. But the process isn't a manual that you can read 3 pages in publication number 1 that teaches the process, because the process is bigger than that. And the process is personal. And so my process and Seb's process and everyone else's process, it's all a bit different, because it was created through a process that then became our own personal process. And so if you've never gone through a rigorous process, multi-year, that has enough adversity, enough challenges, enough puzzles, requires enough curiosity to start learning how you do things, who you are in that moment, then it's a difficult question that Gray Man Dad proposes, to look for the simplistic answer without a process already in place. So my process has been in place a long time. And now I'm going to take that and move it into this question. Because I've had a process in place for a long time, when I come up against something where one of my tools don't work as expected, do you know what I do? Big freaking deal. Big deal, man. Because one of my tools within my process is, I faced worse, and it can always be worse. And as long as I'm hanging out in the present, in the now, I'm not worried about the future or the now, because I know I've faced worse. And let's pretend for a moment that in the now, it's a new level of worse that all my tools aren't working against. I've been in that situation before. And when I was in that situation several times, my patternized response is, okay, cool. I'm going to figure this out. Whatever, it'll get figured out. But now it's my job to observe the new tool that I'm going to build. Like, not be so engaged in the present moment solving the puzzle that I'm one-dimensionally focused on just the problem. I like to, it sounds weird, but I like to split my observational skills into the present solving and the present observing the solving, so that I kind of almost have 2 angles on myself, the action and the observation while I'm actioning, to see if Shaun is doing it as well as he could have or not. So it requires almost like I do an overview of myself to observe myself, so that later I can think about myself, rather than just thinking about the past in the future. What I'm trying to do is thinking about the past in the present. Sounds weird. I know it's hard to explain, but that's what I try to do nowadays. So I'm not operating in the past. I'm not operating in the future. I'm operating in the present. When the problem gets difficult, I can rely on the fact that I've faced harder, or it can always be worse. And if my tools run out, no big deal. I'm in the game. I love a good game. Bring it.
Shaun's playing the game of Shaun in third person. He's not doing it in first person anymore. It's awesome. Chris, you got any thoughts on any of this?
We might talk, what Shaun's describing, some people might call that being mindful, in the moment, present, not overly emotionally reacting, but being mindful and thoughtful about what's going on right then and there, and kind of the implications. And I like that a lot. My work is very different, probably, from the more kinetic work that you guys do in the course of your, at least your course of your work in the military and in law enforcement. My day is spent sitting at a desk or a table most of the time. So for me, a lot of what goes on in my world is in my head, and the challenge with that, I mean, on the one hand, that makes it easy. I'm not in physical danger, and I'm not trying to save somebody else who's in physical danger at the moment, except for being mindful of the possibility of where that other person may be going. And so, for me, I have to be, when I'm interacting with one of my people in the community, I'm mindful of what are they doing, and how are they functioning, and how's that going to affect maybe themselves, their family, their health. I've never had anybody on my watch die by suicide, but that's always kind of in the background as something to be watchful for. I find for myself, so having kind of set the table with that, the challenge is really, literally, we've kind of talked about this. It's trying to stay curious and trying to stay humble. So if what I've tried or what I've thought isn't working or isn't on the right path, I have to take that deep breath and stay mindful and ask myself why, what's going on. And part of what I try to do is to put myself in the shoes, into the mindset of the other person. So the theory of mind, I want to be able to kind of see, well, I don't like what this other person just said or what they're doing, but if I look at it from their perspective, maybe I can get a better understanding of them and figure out how to modulate my response to them. And that often works. Doesn't always work. And the hard part is accepting that you can do everything yourself, maybe the way you want to do it, and the other person or the situation isn't going to cooperate. And so you have to make adjustments. But you also, I think we all have to acknowledge our own weaknesses as humans. We can become ego. We can have little injuries to our egos that prompt or stir up our feelings, our emotions, and then sometimes we react in ways we wish we hadn't reacted later. So I just try to take that pause, and we could call it a tactical pause. Sometimes I write an email and then I don't send it. Or I write the email and then I take, and then I say to myself, I'll come back and do this in the morning, and I'll hit send in the morning if this response still makes sense. Frequently it doesn't make sense.
I like that, though. You just got to watch, make sure you don't hit reply all or something like that. That would not be good. Steve, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So I really liked what Seb had said about immediate action drills. I really like that a lot, because I feel like when one of my tools doesn't work as expected, that's when, my emergency assault or my immediate action drill goes into effect. Right. And I use that immediate action drill, whatever, usually for me, it's some sort of box breathing, something like that, to lower my anxiety levels and to get thinking clearly. Right. And for me, that provides, to put it in kind of like military law enforcement terms, that provides that reactionary gap, right, between me and the problem. Like we talk about that in defensive tactics or hand-to-hand combat, right? That 2 arms length reactionary gap. So I can see their hands, their pocket, their waistband. I can kind of get my situational awareness all squared away. And then I'm reacting. I have enough time to make good decisions, good tactical decisions, or the best possible one in the moment, right? So I usually use that box breathing as my immediate action. And then that gives me the reactionary gap to flip into Shaun mode, and to become curious and go and run kind of a diagnostic check on what's going on with me. Like, well, why aren't my emergency procedures working or my tools working? What's off? What am I eating? How am I sleeping? What other stressors are there in my life? And in that way, I've got that space to really think through that problem. And I try I don't try. I work very hard. I don't like the word try. Try presupposes failure, right? I work very hard to not set a self-imposed arbitrary deadline on that process of thinking through the problem, right? And I always add a huge amount of cheerfulness in the face of diversity. That's one of my shout out to Commando Sundials, my 4-5 Commando brother in Great Britain, for sending the Commando principles my way and spending some time with those boys. Like a cheerfulness in the face of adversity, and knowing that been there, done that, and it could always be worse. I know I'm gonna drive forward and reach the objective. Might not be the way I envision it at first. Might not even be with the tools that I have. Might be with new tools that I discover, or a new conversation with people like you, right? Or that circle, right? But knowing that I've been through that fire before, and made it through on the other end, is helpful. So,
yeah. Chris, what do you got?
Just a question for the group, if I may. Where does the philosophy of Stoicism fit into this conversation?
You're asking the right people. We got a few. Steve, why don't you jump on here first?
Chris, that's my jam. I love Stoic philosophy. And it goes back to something that Seb had said earlier. I think talking about internal and external factors and what you can control, right? And that Stoic, like the cornerstone of Stoicism, is there, controlling what you actually have control over. Like, I don't have control of your perception of me. I don't have control of your reaction to me, or your emotional response to me, but I have control of how I present myself. I have control over how I structure my day. I have control over the things that I consume, whether that's media, literature, visual medium, that sort of thing. I have control over those things. I have control of when I go to bed. I have control of how much alcohol or how little alcohol I consume. That's what I love about Stoicism. To me, that's always my baseline. And I always go back to that. Like, hey, I cannot control this outcome. I cannot control these external factors, but I can focus on the process, right? And I can be process oriented rather than outcome oriented.
Yeah, looking after the locus of control, right? Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, we had this conversation partially yesterday, and it's always an interesting conversation. And I find that people that live the Stoic principles, not because they read about the Stoic principles, but because life taught them the Stoic principles based on their circumstances, tend to use Stoicism a lot more effectively and with more nuance approach. Whereas people that, don't have that experience to correlate the two will take a Stoicism book and then they will make everything about Stoic philosophy. And now it turns into, I'm having a conversation with the missus and I'm detaching from my emotion and she's detaching from hers. And it doesn't work like this. And I was in a presentation once, I was speaking in front of a group, and I addressed, in the way that I was speaking, somebody perceived some Stoicism. So they brought this to bear. And I said, I never read Stoicism, but I am Stoic. So it's all of this kind of makes sense to me. But after what happened was, one of the ladies came over and she said, listen, you got to talk to the husbands. Like, they're all on this Stoicism bandwagon right now, and none of them is having an emotional connection with their spouse. So the next day I did a lot of research that night, and I found out what some of the issues were with the Stoic philosophy. And there are some shorts, just like anything else, just like any good thing, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing if it's not done correctly and with intent. And so I came back the next day and I said, listen, guys, like, There are times where, yes, acknowledge the emotion, set them aside, and let's go. We're process oriented, and we're going to regain control over whatever tailspin we're in. But if you're in a reaction and your spouse is being emotional right now, it's not the time to whip out the Stoicism book and have that conversation. It's more about the time to be present, to be empathetic, to really engage in that process. Anyways, I digress. I'm no relationship expert, but it's just one of those things that have the propensity. One of the issue with Stoicism, if you haven't experienced it and developed it as a result of the things that you've been through, and you take the book and you read it, is that a lot of the Stoic philosophies almost come across like mitigating risk associated with life, so adversity, so essentially avoiding pain. So you can always avoid pain, but you also will avoid joy if you do it in a certain way. So you have to be very mindful of that. Yes, if you don't let the appeal of the gain in getting into a love or a romantic relationship, you're not going to experience breakup, but you're also not going to experience a loving relationship. So everything has an equal and opposite reaction, and sometimes that reaction isn't equal. Sometimes it's exponentially worse to not do it. And so just like every time somebody is sort of going off on the whole Stoicism thing, like, you have to kind of be aware of who you're talking to, what their life experience is, and those types of things. But generally speaking, what I do with people is, answer me this: who here makes better decisions when they're angry or when they're super happy? And nobody ever raises their hands. So for me, the two biggest sort of components of Stoicism is emotional regulation and not trying to control external factors. If you can focus on those two things, like, you have, the rest of it is just sort of crumbs, and you can deal with the crumbs. But it's the fundamentally, those two things cause a lot of issue to people. Emotional overreaction to absolutely everything that happens. Now, something interesting happens when you do this. Eventually, you get to a point where overinvestment in emotions becomes really hard to deal with for you, because every time somebody is being overly emotional, it kind of shuts you down. It attacks you to the core. And I've experienced this more and more as I get older. It's the really strange thing. And so for me, as Chris alluded to earlier, I need to be aware that this can become a shortcoming if it becomes an emotional detachment that's so deep that I no longer can empathize or connect with people. And so for me, as an identified possible shortcoming of this, of how I've been acting, I have to be mindful of that and just kind of, self-regulate, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I really like that. Steve, I'll come to you in 2 seconds here. I just wanted to hit this real quick because it's fresh in my mind, is that I think the biggest issue with Stoicism, especially right now, is that it's seen as a quick fix. Oh, just be stoic in the moment. And the connotation of Stoicism is actually a removal or a subjugating of emotional statement. And that's not true. That's not what Stoicism is. But I think that's the correlation that most people have with it, is just that, if you have a stoic nature, you're not outwardly showing emotion. And I think therefore people believe that, I know I did for many years, that it was a removal of emotion rather than a understanding, and it's just not an outward expression of emotion. I mean, I have the obstacle is the way tattooed on my wrist for a reason. And I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy, but I'm not so much a fan of Stoicism, if that makes any sense. Steve, what do you got? Where are you going to hit up there? What do you got?
Yeah, I really wanted to jump on what Seb was saying, because I think that's a very common, I think, misunderstanding about Stoicism, is that it's emotional detachment, and I disagree with that. I think it's exactly what Seb, and I was glad to hear you say this too, Seb, use the word empathy in what you were talking about, because Stoicism to me is like, if we use that husband and wife example that you used at the beginning, right? We're arguing and yelling, she's having an emotional response, yelling and screaming or whatever. And I become emotionally detached, and because I read a Stoic book and I'm just, concrete, I'm a marble statue, and this, and then your spouse is like, oh my God, I'm not having this connection. There's no emotional connection. He's like a robot or what have you, right? That causes all kinds of problems. I don't, that's not the right response. That's a misinterpretation of what Stoicism is, in my opinion. Stoicism is exactly what you said. It's regulating your emotional response to her anger or her being upset or whatever that situation is, and not having that knee-jerk reaction, and applying empathy and like active listening skills and all that sort of thing, so that you can truly be present and communicate with your partner. Right. That's how I see it.
100%. Shaun, you got any thoughts on this?
I'm going to make two bold statements, and then I'll deconstruct them, and then we'll see where it goes. So first one's first. Stoicism is a crutch. Pause for effect. Everyone get their breath back. And the second one is Stoicism is the new alpha male competition. Pause for effect. Now I'm going to deconstruct those. Stoicism, like anything, has its relative benefits. It also has its detractors. And so much like I enjoy reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, I also like reading Einstein. And I also like reading Wordsworth. I like reading a lot of things. And I think that's the key to my first bold statement, that Stoicism is a crutch. Stoicism came about by a lot of deep thinkers thinking for decades about things and then writing it down on a piece of paper. And then those ideas were debated. Maybe not so much in Marcus Aurelius' case. He was debating with himself in his own private diary. But generally speaking, Seneca or any of these characters would openly have discourse with their peers or their friends or the guy on the dirt street to see get a sense of, are they understanding their ideas as well as they could. And so again, Stoicism, I believe, requires a lot of deep thought to see how it fits into your life. Stoicism has now become a crutch for non-deep thinkers. That's even bolder statement. But that is what is happening as I see it as a social phenomena out on the internet. I'm not going to throw any people under the bus. I'm just going to say that putting out a 27-word quote that is super impactful, put that out to the internet, and a big chunk of the internet right now will read that, nod its head, and take it on as fact. But they don't understand it as a whole, because to create that kind of thought, to create that kind of a quote, took decades of deep thought. You can't take deep thought on as a shallow 4-second moment and then take it on as fact. You've got to take it on and deeply think about it for a long time to see if it makes sense to you. So Stoicism has become a crutch for non-deep thinking. Second point, Stoicism is the new alpha male competition, where everybody out there who wants to portray a alpha male lifestyle is trying to display the best characteristics of Stoicism, which means, as the example, that emotional detachment. Emotional detachment is 2 words that can mean many things. It has a whole bandwidth to it, but it's being distorted into this very simple linear idea that emotionally detached means you are now an armor-clad robot. But that is not the case. And so the nuance of Stoicism has been missed in 2 words. And so it only gets magnified when various individuals and social media will try to out-portray Stoicism against the person that they're quote-unquote competing against who is also very stoic. Now it's a battle of the stoics. Now it's a battle of who's the most robotic. And so these are the two things that I've seen in respect to stoicism and how it can be a detractor. So I believe that stoicism is a good thing when it's understood at its deepest levels, much like Einstein is a good thing, but only when you understand it at a deeper level.
That is fantastic. Steve, what do you got?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting because when Shaun initially dropped those bombs, I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. But after listening to him explain it, I get it. And I think that that's the internet. That's the detriment of the internet. Like, there's the positive of the internet is like you get to disseminate motivating messages or inspirational messages, or disseminate, like we're doing today, disseminate tools to help people through adversity, those sorts of things, right? But where the drawback of it is when you do get the competition of the mouth breathers, right? The non-deep thinkers, right? Because they're not actually reading and digesting and taking the good bits and all of that sort of stuff, and really examining what stoicism is or means to them, right? It's just used as, oh, well, this is the next marketing trend, right? This is how I'm going to sell my training program. This is how I'm going to sell my t-shirts. This is how I'm going to sell my baseball caps or whatever. And again, I just don't, when I read stoicism or kind of go down that path, I don't see it as emotional detachment at all. I really resonate more with Seb's phrase, emotional regulation. That's how I see it. So, like, the object of the game, those folks that are portraying themselves as kind of like, armor-clad robots, as Shaun said, they're not really digesting and understanding, and kind of moving forward from actually taking on board or reading a quote and actually turning that into knowledge, deeply understood knowledge, right? They're just regurgitating something that they saw was a trend on a reel or a story or something like that in hopes that they will get more engagement, and sell whatever nonsense they're selling these days.
Yeah. I think this is the difference between studying philosophy and dogmatism, right? Of being dogmatic to something versus actually trying to understand it for yourself. Chris, you got any thoughts on any of this?
I'm just trying to stay curious and humble here and listening. I think it's great to. I'm an admirer of Stoic philosophy. I try to bring it into my own life, but agree, it's if we're using Stoicism like it's a bumper sticker, stay Stoic. That's not a solution for anybody. And so, yes, emotion regulation, but without the empathy and compassion, it's not a that Stoicism doesn't eliminate those human qualities of empathy and compassion.
Yeah, I totally. I had a friend of mine ask me at one point in time when I was just starting to get into Stoicism, and he asked me, what is it to you? Describe it to me. And I said, well, at least the way I understand it is it's about understanding yourself to such a degree that the outside world becomes understandable. And he was like, well, that makes a lot of sense. But I think the key in all of this, and especially with, going back to the tools that we use and the processes that we have and all this stuff, is that it stems from self-awareness. And that, like, at the very core of it all is being curious about yourself and understanding who you are, and like taking the time to figure out how we're feeling in this moment. And so the question I have for you guys on this is that with how important self-awareness is in all of these things, how do you cultivate that awareness in the heat of the moments, in the midst of the challenges? Like when you want to be able to use a stoic trait like the obstacle is the way, and you have a massive challenge in front of you, and everything in your brain and body is telling you to run. How do you gain that self-awareness in those moments? Let's go around. Shaun, I'm going to start with you. What do you got?
Sure. I think it depends on where you are, what phase of life you're in. Young Shaun, at 18 before I joined the Army, I didn't understand any of this stuff. But now at nearly 61, I understand it better. And so when I look back over that timeline, I consider this the pattern of the understanding. And so it was my job way back in the day that every time I got in a moment that was uh, to some degree chance perhaps unsolvable, or I didn't know how to do it, or it was a big moment and I didn't know how to choose a right tool. Maybe I didn't even have any tools at that point. Well, it's my job to understand the moment, take it in, and whether I win or lose, pass or fail, do the thing or don't, eventually there's going to be an after action report in my head where I'm going to deconstruct whatever I did, consider the deconstructed moments and how I can nuance each moment, then recompile it together just like a operating program or just like a building code. I'll recompile it and I'll run the next iteration at the next moment that I face a similar situation. And then I will observe, create pattern, deconstruct, recompile, reiterate. That's what I've done all my life, generally speaking. I'm talking like it's a computer program or a software process, but you can use any language you want. So as time has gone by, I've learned how to run my pattern better. And so eventually my patterns started disappearing because a lot of it was offloaded into an autonomous response or an unconscious response, where now I get to operate more in flow state than I did planning state. But I only made the shift from always planning and creating, compiling, deconstructing, all of that stuff way back in the day. Nowadays, doesn't happen nearly as much because, again, I've moved from thinking to flowing, but I only got to flowing more often nowadays based on the fact that I did the homework of pattern observation, tearing it all down, recompiling it, and reiterating. So my tools were created over time, and now I'm at a point where I don't even feel like I need tools because the problem kind of solves itself as it unfolds. I don't feel like I have to be overly engaged in the process of hardcore math in my head. I just trust my processes now that I've built over time.
Love that. Chris, I'm going to come to you. What do you think on this?
Well, I think I'm going to just draft in the wake of Shaun's wisdom and just kind of interject maybe two thoughts. One is, in part, my question about Stoicism was sort of got into my head as I was listening to him earlier in the conversation, talking about the being mindful in the moment, which I think is part of what Stoicism encourages, is to not become overly reactive to what just happened and not to be catastrophizing what might happen in the future, but to be mindful of where you are right now in the moment and what's needed. And then I think self-awareness is key to that. And you can't be stoic without that self-awareness. I think, and Shaun didn't say this, but what I heard is, and I'm just kind of looking at a note that I made for myself, is I think it's important to be in that space and to find that place where you can kind of float and be comfortable not winning every moment, every interaction, every conversation. And so that pulls back from that alpha competition. I think the true stoic, the true self-aware person, the true mindful person is floating in that humble space where they don't have to win every single interaction.
Kind of sounds like you're describing jujitsu there, Chris. It's almost exactly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, right on.
I love it. This is, and I think martial arts probably in general, most martial arts have the same philosophy of being able to flow in the moment and
Be
being
water.
able to, be like water. Exactly. Seb, you got any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do. You know, your best sports team wouldn't dream of showing up on the field without practicing. And yet we think that when it's our big game days where we are faced with incredible adversity and we have done no practice, that somehow we're going to rise up to the occasion. Well, that goes against, unless we are smarter than everybody and everybody else is doing it wrong. For me, I really like to tell people that is the importance of doing hard things, of putting yourself through adversity, because you get to practice what it feels like to manage your mind when things get hard. It's not going to happen accidentally. It needs to be done regularly. And the more you get well versed in it, the more you can elevate the level of adversity, and the more you respond, the more you teach yourself and your central nervous system that you actually can deal with things. And it's going to make you, react a lot better when the heat is turned on. The problem is trying to make any sort of cognitive decision in the heat of battle when things are going sideways is not the time. It just simply isn't. You're going to react how you react. That's it. That's about all there is. So if you haven't spent the time developing that skill set, it's going to be a huge problem. Self-awareness is also having the self-awareness of knowing that, I haven't had anything adversity related happen to me in the last little while. And I certainly seem to have fallen into a funk where I'm not doing anything that's overly challenging. And maybe I'm getting complacent in this. Even if I'm somebody that embraces challenges, you can still fall victim to that trap. So it's important to really take the time to consider that. Once you've established your tools and they become autonomous, so to speak, as Shaun was alluding to, him being in a flow state. Him being in a flow state is having done it so many times that it's no different than driving. And everybody can relate to this. It's like when you start driving at 16, for the first 2 years, everything you do, including putting your blinker on, is a cognitive process. But once you've been driving for 20, 30 years, you'll get home and I don't even know how I got here. And that in itself has its danger as well. If anything changes along the equation, it can create issues. But the point I'm making is it will be relegated to autonomous process, which, again, is going to bolster up that confidence. One of the things I wanted to just clarify before I move on is, we spoke about being time compressed. We spoke about making decisions. We spoke about engaging and doing certain things, rather quickly because something is happening and we need to be reacting now. And one of the things that I think has to be attached to this is a little bit of grace. If you are time compressed to make a decision and it doesn't turn out the way you wanted it to, intended it to, or normally does, why was that? Why don't take 6 months to evaluate something that you did in a 2.5 second or 5 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever it is, time compress. Evaluate your reaction unfavorably and start beating yourself up for not having the ability to deal with this problem. It's like you have to realize and you have to be able to say, okay, what could have I done better that would have realistically changed things? But also, were there some aggravating or mitigating factors that I need to consider in when I made my decision, and what can I do better next time if I'm faced with the same odds? Because I think that what happens is, confidence is slow to build, but it comes down real quick. It actually does. Like, it comes down real quick. And unless you have a long tracking history of having the ability to do certain things, you just need one bad, whatever it is, to start injecting self-doubt in your process and really deconstruct everything you've ever worked for. And we see it in mixed martial arts, with some fighters sometimes that, have flown through the ranks and destroyed everybody along the way. And all of a sudden it just takes one knockout and you never see that fighter back again because they've never faced adversity. And I mean that respectfully. Obviously they do. They face adversity in fighting, but that's their level of adversity that put them outside of their comfort zone. And I think that for them to necessarily not have the ability to have a bit of grace towards their actions in totality of the circumstances is a big problem. And then having associated expectations is another problem. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that piece, because I think it's important that when we are conducting a reassessment, that we take into consideration all of the factors that were involved in making that decision and how they affected the making of the decision, so that we can, evaluate it accurately.
Could not agree more with that one for sure. Shaun, what do you got?
Just a quick one on self-awareness and actually cutting yourself some slack, or cutting yourself some grace, as Seb said. Directly above us there is the quote that we've had on the go for a long time now, and that's just do your best, man. Just do your best in the moment, in the present moment. Because if you can cling to the idea or cling to the strategy that for the rest of the year, I'm going to do my best in every moment, that doesn't mean that you're winning. That doesn't mean the outcome that you're seeking, that you're clinging desperately to, that is the definition of what you wanted in the mid to long future, that you didn't even understand, because none of us do. That artifact that we create, don't cling to it. Just do your best now. Now. Because if you can do your best in this second, 10 years from now, you'll get to look back and have way less regret. Because you can literally tell yourself, man, if I knew what I know now, I would have done it differently 10 years ago. But you were doing your best, so you can cut yourself some slack. That's what I do. My biggest regrets are the times that I didn't do my best. And I can look back on those moments and think, I was screwing up because I was half-assing, or I was screwing up because I wasn't fully engaged in the moment. I was screwing up because I was trying to make it about me instead of the people around me. However it is, however I screwed it up, generally speaking, I'm regretful for those moments because I know I wasn't doing my best. Since I've run this mantra in my head, just do your best, Shaun, just freaking do your best, I have way less regrets. And I think that's the same for anyone that I've ever talked to. If you want to be on your rocking chair when you're 70 on your front porch, looking back on your life and full of regret, then don't do your best. Just half-ass your life. Half-ass it. There's an important distinction between half-assing and going all in on your life. And it's in your mind. It isn't push-ups. It isn't burpees. Half-assing isn't 10 burpees. All in isn't 20 burpees. It's where your mind is at. Understanding the why of the moment. Why am I doing burpees? Why is the number 10 versus 20? The why, the mindset, do your best, and you'll have way less regret in the future. It's like a time machine. You're controlling your future by acting appropriately in the present. You're cutting your future self some slack by not cutting yourself too much slack today. That's a thought for you to chew on.
Great point. Chris, what you got?
So just, reflecting on the conversation that we're having here, and part of what we're talking about are reps, quality reps, not just reps, but quality reps in practice, as well as, in the heat of the moment. Those reps really count, and they're important. And I want to emphasize quality reps. Just going through reps just to go through the motions doesn't take you anywhere meaningful. But none of us are in this room, in this conversation, are exactly young, and I'm pretty sure I'm the oldest gray beard here in the conversation. But I do a lot. I teach college, so the people that I spend part of my day with, frequently are undergraduate students, college students who haven't yet had the reps, or perhaps of quite a bit of concern of mine, they haven't had the opportunity for the reps, some of the reps, in part because they've been protected. We have, as a society, we've changed our attitude, we've changed our orientation largely towards younger people. And by this, what I mean is parenting and public schools are different than they were when I was a child in the 1970s. And I'm quite sure each of us, you guys are younger than I am, but things in the 80s and 90s were probably a little different too. The concept of, I think an important piece of what we're talking about when we talk about reps is those reps in the heat of the moment really matter. And there has to be consequences that matter too. So the outcomes of taking a risk. And so one of the things that I see we've done in modern Western society, at least in the US and probably Canada, is we've attempted to shield and protect our youth. And by that, I mean children from a very young age up until they launch into adulthood. We've shielded them as much as we can from stress, from pressure. Everybody gets a prize. No child is left unsupervised. We took down jungle gyms so kids wouldn't, break an arm or a leg falling off a jungle gym. But without those opportunities to take those risks, to have those exposures to stress and challenge and threat under relatively safe and managed conditions in childhood, we've removed an incredibly important opportunity to learn. We've removed a learning opportunity. And so the concept of stress inoculation is very much like any vaccine. A vaccine, you introduce a little bit of a pathogen into the body so that the body builds up defenses, so that when it's exposed to a larger dose of that pathogen, it's more ready to defend itself, protect itself. So the idea of stress inoculation for me is, and I think, this has a long history in social sciences. The idea of stress inoculation is as a child, you need to have a little bit of stress. You need to have circumstances in front of you where you might fail and where the adults are going to allow you to fail or to not be as successful. And in those cases, in childhood, you want that to happen when the stakes are not high. So if I try out for the soccer team when I'm in 12th grade and I don't make it, well, okay, I'm disappointed. The other kids are better than me. Maybe this is a learning opportunity for me to, absorb what it means to be rejected or disappointed. Maybe it's a learning opportunity for me to say, hey, wow, I need to up my game. I need to get better. I need to work harder because those other kids out there, man, what I saw, the way they're playing, I didn't deserve to make the team. So I fear for our youth that much of what we've been talking about here today in terms of facing adversity is they haven't had the appropriate reps in their youth. And then they get to college or that first job or to boot camp or into that first early adult experience. Maybe it's having a child or trying to pay bills and whatnot. And they just haven't had the preparation. So where do we go with that? Thoughts on that? I'm just like the wisdom in this room, the experience in this room. How do we solve for that?
I love this. You got the idea in my head. Steve, I'm going to come to you here in 2 seconds. It's when people launch. I thought it was kind of hilarious. I had this little image of putting like a teenager, like an 18, 19-year-old into a catapult and just launching them. And if you didn't give him any reps of like how to tuck and roll when he hits the ground, it's not going to be good. He's going to slam into the ground. It's going to be pretty hard. Steve, what do you got?
Well, first off, Chris, I don't know whether to smile or be disappointed I didn't get there first because I'd written stress inoculation through deliberate adversity on my notepad here. So I smiled when you said it. I was like, God, he beat me to the punch. But I 100% agree with what you're talking about. And it's something I've worked hard with. My son's a freshman. He's in his second week of university now. It's something I've worked really hard to inject into his life is doing hard things deliberately, right? Like coming on a dawn patrol swim in the ocean with me when it's dark and it's cold and it's scary, and busting, getting out there in the surf, like doing something. Man, I don't like this, Dad. I'm like, yeah, okay, but we're still going to do it. Now, how do we figure that out? And like putting him in those deliberate situations to let him have those reps and build fundamentals and experiment with the different tools that we're talking about here in the room today, so that he can build his personal practices moving forward, right? So that when he's faced with these, now he's launching, right? And now he's faced with hundreds of micro decisions that he has to make during the day. And now, ideally, I like to think so anyway, because we had added some deliberate adversity into his life. He is able to deal with adversity and make those micro decisions in a better way. And every moment that he's in the day that he's faced with those micro decisions, he's doing his best, right? So yeah, I that's the only way that I can see that we solve for it, is we inject deliberate adversity evolutions back into the system, right? Because otherwise they don't get to practice those tools. They don't get to employ those tools and see what works for them, and they don't get to build their fundamentals. And it's like anything in the military or law enforcement that we've done. Like if you want to break it down to like tactical or shooting skills, for example, right? It's fundamentals. It's always the fundamentals. It always boils down to hundreds and hundreds of reps at the fundamentals, and hundreds of reps where that might not have been the most ideal reps. But those non-ideal reps, where we didn't meet a standard, are those learning opportunities where we grow from. So in some way, shape, or form, add adversity into your life, whatever that looks like for you. Shaun, it's the mountain biking, or Shaun's wife, like she has an endurance race coming up, I think. Those sorts of things could be an ocean swim when it's dark out, right? In the morning before sunrise, when it's spooky and maybe there's sharks in the water or something, right? I don't know. It's always spooky for me. I'll tell you that right now. I still do it, but I do it specifically because it's spooky and I don't like it. Because I'm like, well, I'm not going to, like, I choose whether I'm going to do this or not. You know what I mean? So it's that mental exercise for me. Now I'm faced with a decision. Like for me, I'm not an airborne ninja like some of you guys in here, right? Like I have jumped out of planes. It's not a comfortable situation for me. But I like that because it forces me to go through some of my processes and make deliberate decisions. Like, well, who do I want to be today? How am I going to handle this challenge? Right? How am I going to be the best in this moment? Well, I'm just going to close my eyes and step out. Usually, it's kind of how that works. But it works, right? So yeah. So whatever that adversity looks like for you or your tribe, try and introduce that a deliberate adversity into your daily practices. We live in a super abundant society, a super soft society. And we got to get out there and skin our elbows and skin our knees a little bit and learn how to bounce back from that.
I totally agree with that. I think there's a lack of rites of passage that like used to be part of societies that we don't see anymore. And my number one thing is jujitsu. I think that's get your kids into jujitsu is definitely a good one. Seb, any thoughts on this?
I do, and it's a little bit ironic that Chris is the one that kind of paused the question. And the reason why I'm saying this is he probably has the ability to affect that more than any of us. All Chris has to do is to write a book. right? And I mean that respectfully. I mean, with your professional knowledge and everything that's coming down the pipe, maybe going aside from that one, but specifically for parenting and having that conversation, because I think ultimately what happens is people tend to listen a lot more to the people that have that PhD letter in front of their names, especially if they're involved in the soft community. And I think that might be a great venture for you, Chris. But in the meantime, for the rest of us, it's just to continue to have those conversations. Like, we need to continue having those conversations in all of the media that we're having them. So that includes podcasts and having critical conversations, all of this stuff. What I find interesting nowadays is, so if I said to you before the GWAT, if I said to you, how many of those people from that generation were ever going to head to war? You would have been like, none. It's going to be hard to fill the boats. And yet we did. So sometimes, I think we start clinging to our version of life and how things were, even if we're comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that sometimes we may, and I'm guilty of this myself, is project some fears in relation to what is different from what we are doing. Now, some of these things are concerning. Don't get me wrong. There's no question that that's the case. But as far as fatalistic to the point where, say, it's now an epigenetic and, the next generation of humans are completely unable to be resilient because they lost the ability to be, I think is probably, we're going to hit a turnaround point before that is what I think. And I actually think that it's quite upon us. I do believe that humans are very, very bad at being moderated. When we change something, we go from black to white, and then we wonder what worked and what didn't. And you can't say what worked or what didn't because you changed 28 things in one go instead of doing it sort of incrementally. And so what you're seeing now is, we went from, completely on this side where it caused grievances and issues, and we went the complete opposite, which is creating issues and grievances. And so, but every time that this happened, and it seems to be cyclical, we saw it in the 50s, we saw it in the 30s, we saw it in the 60s. Like, it happens from generation to generation, where seemingly an entire generation is lost, and next thing you know, things are kind of coming around. So, one of the conversation I have with parents when I coach people, and it's always the same conversation. How do you consider yourself as being, as a human being? How successful are you considering yourself based upon the benchmark or the bar that you have set for yourself? Do you consider yourself pretty successful, or have you managed life well? Were you able to bounce back from adversity, those types of things? And it's always yes, absolutely. How was your childhood? Oh man, really tough. Okay, so let me get this straight. So now what you want to do is you want to take all the adversity off your kids and hope that they turn into you. Like, it's not going to work. Like, how does that make sense? It makes no sense. You're going to do the complete opposite. They'll be unable to deal with things. And so I like the monitoring adversity, is what I like to call it. Like, if my kid's getting beat up every day at school, that's not going to continue. Like, I will not allow that, because there's a risk of physical harm and mental and emotional harm that comes from that could be irreparable. But if there's little things that, I know he's going to kind of pay for it a little bit, go for it. I'm watching, and really embrace that. But I think that the more of those conversations we have without being canceled, is on the platform that is going to be a contributor to turning that ship around. I truly believe that.
I think a lot of it has to do with the example too, right? Like, I think we've talked about this before, is that you can't just say, go do this. You got to be doing it for them to actually see it. And I see this at the jiu-jitsu dojo all the time, is that there's lots of parents who put their kids into martial arts, and then I'll see you in half an hour, and off they go. And they're not in good shape. They don't train. They don't do any of those things. They just send their kids there, which is a great thing as a starting point. But I think if you really want your kids to love those challenges, you have to be taking them on a regular basis yourself. Shaun, you got any thoughts on any of this?
Life is a grand experiment. And if you don't understand that yet, come back and watch this podcast in the future and let it sink in. Because that's what we're all in. A grand experiment. It is unsolved for you. It is unsolved for me. It is unsolved for the human species. It is a grand experiment, and mostly of our own making. We have the authority. We have the self-agency to create the universe around us. And so, given that I have two sons, one has just gone back to his third year in engineering. The other one has just come back through the door for his second year of pre-medicine. What I'm told by a number of adults in our small community and people who meet our sons is they were raised really well. There are good reasons for that, and it is bang, bang, bang. But it doesn't matter what my reasons are or my wife's reasons are or our kids' outcomes are. What is important is that at the end of the day, the people around us have evaluated that the process that we put in place created a good outcome. So the experiment of our children has created a good lab result. And so you can look at yourself, your life, in the same way. You can look at yourself as a grand experiment over a timeline from a top-down view of 10,000 feet and consider, did I do well? Did I do well in life? Did I do well in my life? Did I do well for others? If you can look at yourself truly, objectively, and think, I did pretty well, then you've got to figure out how to recreate that for others. And I'm not talking about for your kids or for your neighbor. I'm talking about for the world around you, which is, I believe, to Chris's point or his question. It's not maybe how to raise my sons. It's how to demonstrably impact the world around me so that it's a better world. I think that's the question. And I do believe there are ways to do that. And Seb already illustrated one of them, and that is to write well with impactful wisdom that will change a generation to some degree. The book, The Operator Syndrome, is an example of that. But to follow on with what Seb said, I believe that Chris could write another book that would be answering his own question. And it might not just be his own novel thoughts. It's probably a compilation of wisdom from others that he's interacted with, other books that he's read, other movies that he's watched, a bus going by in front of a bus stop, whatever it is that influences Chris's mind that he can then capture and put out for another generation. That is good stuff. I believe that it is our job to influence the world around us, and we're all capable of it. We just have to figure out how, and everyone can do it in different ways. If I don't write, then I've got to learn how to speak. If I don't speak, then I've got to learn how to paint. If I don't paint, I've got to learn how to do. And so while I'm out on my bike, riding the trails, doing push-up, doing whatever I'm doing in my little videos, little stories, little Instagram moments, I'm doing that for me for sure. But partially, it goes into social media feeds because I'm trying to demonstrate how I live my life. And if anyone establishes that I'm running a pretty good life, then they can pick up what I'm putting down. They can mimic it or emulate it or mirror it or adjust it for themselves to see if it works for them. Just like reading a good book, seeing if it works for me. Just like reading Einstein, see if it works for me. We all have to cherry pick our universe to bring it into our universe to see if we can create a new, better universe. And so I believe that the internet, social media, what we're doing right now is maybe one of the best ways to answer Chris's question. And that is just to have some cool people out there being cool and helping raise a generation through inspiration rather than through influence.
This is getting into it. We could probably sit here for like another 3-4 hours just talking about this stuff. This is awesome. Chris, you got any thoughts on any of that?
Well, just going to comment. I notice everybody's just signed me up to write another book. I just finished the last one, so I'll probably take a break for a little while. What do you guys think? I teach undergraduate students. Should this be an assignment? Listen to the collective.
I would say so. This is, interestingly enough, as Shaun was talking, I was thinking about the fact that this is basically what we're trying to do with the collective itself. Is we're trying to move the needle, as Shaun likes to say. We're trying to expand the societal conception of what it is to have a conversation.
Yeah.
As the big one. And that's one of the things we've been working on for quite a while. But I think personally, yeah. And it's a little bit selfish in my mind. Yeah, you should watch the collective because that's
But
good.
It's not just that. It's not just that. I mean, we're doing our best to bring our own personal wisdoms. We're doing our best to bring our own little collective wisdoms. But I know one of my jobs here for sure is to stir the pot, is to create a little bit of intellectual tension or friction, is to think outside of the box and bring in maybe not a novel idea, but bring in a splinter in someone's mind so that they can't unsee it, can't unthink it. I think that much like Marcus Aurelius creating magnificent quotes that will exist throughout time, I do believe it's our job, not just my job, but our job to put splinters in the mind of others that they need to work on. And standard issue conversation is not doing it. It requires conversations like this that are thought provoking, not thought answering. Because I'm sure, Chris, based on your body of work, you could make some reasonably definitive statements about operator syndrome, plus or minus, that would answer a lot of questions for a lot of people out there, just like it did for me when I listened to your hour-and-a-half YouTube video with Gord Hurley. I learned a lot from that. In fact, to the degree where just last week, I got a superficial cervical plexus block in my Frankenstein neck just to check it out. And I know that it's not the full deal, but I just thought I'm going to baby step my way into this, understand it a little bit better. I'll learn, but by me learning, I'll be able to talk about it in the future for others, for other operators who maybe have never heard of these things or are reluctant to step into the unknown, operate in the chaos of curiosity, and see where it takes them. So I think that, again, it's our job to push the pace out there for the world to think about things with a splinter in the mind, unique, out of the box way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Now we are getting close to time here, and I think that's a great spot to kind of cut in. I know Chris has got a hard timing here, so I don't want to keep us here too long, but let's go around. We're going to get some final thoughts. Let's get some whatever's still boiling in the back of your head, anything at all. Steve, I'm going to hit you first. What do you got?
Yeah. Geez, oh man. It's just a fan. Well, first off, I just appreciate the opportunity to always come on here and have a conversation with you guys. Every time I do, no matter if it's guests that I've been on here with previously or new folks that I've met, like Seb and Chris today, I'm over here taking notes and I'm coming away with stuff, right? And that's exactly what I like. I want to reemphasize what Shaun just said. That's what's great about the collective is every time I come into these conversations, I may have a certain perspective or a certain way I'm looking at things or a certain way I solve certain problems, that sort of thing. And then there's a thread somewhere in here, usually several threads that are presented, and it gives me something to pull on and research and go back and read up on. And it always makes me better. So, and I think through leading by example, as I feel we are doing with these conversations, getting back to being able to have intelligent discourse, respectful discourse, about, issues I think that are at the forefront of kind of making our society a better place. I think the better off we are, right? The more we show that example, the more that we will encourage deep thinking and create deep thinkers, in my opinion. So,
couldn't agree more. Chris, you got any final thoughts?
Man, that's hard. I just was listening to Steve and just jotted down a few words. So I'm gonna be mindful now that part of the audience at some point in the next week or two is going to be my own students who are likely to watch this. So I guess speaking to all of your audience, but especially to my own students who I know, the value of conversation like this. I've met Seb once before, and we had a great conversation. Hadn't met the others on here, but thoroughly enjoyed the conversation. And so I think collectively, the collective that we formed today was really about listening and kind of putting out our own thoughts and opinions, but also absorbing and being willing to be challenged. So stay curious, stay humble. If you can be stoic and understand it from a nuanced perspective, and then mindful in the moment, very valuable. And these are, the analogy of the bison turning into the storm. So for me, I've actually made a list of some things I need to do or want to do, intend to do, which is to do a little more reading on stoicism and curiosity. And I need to understand this bison into the wind, into the storm concept a little better and go read about that.
Yeah.
And then have another one-on-one chat with Seb to really kind of dig into where that came from.
One-on-one chats with Seb are always good.
Yes. Well, and also to add in there, hope I get the opportunity to come back and continue these conversations.
Yeah. I'm pretty confident saying this as though I'm the one that schedules these things, but you got an open seat here, buddy. No problem. Absolutely. Seb, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah, I do. Thanks a lot, guys. It was a great conversation and with great folks, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. I really did. Two things. One of the things is in line with what Chris was talking about earlier, is that maybe, and we've all been there at a time where we perhaps wouldn't have enacted certain things that we learned today, or perhaps we would have reacted adversely to certain things that were said today. So there's two things I will say to this. A, it may be a while before somebody experiences life in a way that makes this conversation make sense. But at the very least, if they've been exposed to it and they've seen it and they've heard it, it gives them something to go back to. So I think not necessarily being able to action all of the things that you heard here today doesn't change the fact that you now have that in your toolbox. So if you ever face a set of circumstances in which some of those filters can be applied, go back, and that set of circumstances will make a lot more sense to you once you re-engage in it and you have the life experience to sort of understand it a little bit better, a little bit deeper. Secondly, in line with this, if you're having an adverse reaction to anything that is coming from somebody else, I always focus on, why am I having an adverse reaction? Why? And instead of going, well, because that person said X, Y, and Z or whatever, no, what internally makes me react to what it is that's occurring in front of me right now? And those are the shortcomings. Those are the little things. And whether you want to admit it or not, you're likely responsible for the hurt that you are going through right now. So you're going to need to essentially understand why you're reacting a certain way and take the proper actions to remedy that situation so that you can mitigate. I'm not talking about eliminating your reactions. I'm talking about mitigate some of the adverse reactions. But if you are experiencing an adverse reaction when listening to any of this, this is a place where you want to dive into. You want to dive in. Here's your opportunity to expose something, because problem exposed can be remedied too. Problems hidden just will surface later exponentially stronger.
100%. Shaun, final thoughts?
I'll keep mine brief. Hi to all of Chris's students. I made just one set of notes before I went into the show today, and I'm going to read it out real quick. Tools in the toolbox is what I entitled the page. Episode 400 of the podcast is certainly evidence of a valuable tool in our toolbox for me. Conversing on a large variety of subjects with a tendency towards evolutionary thought pursuit has been challenging and rewarding. Mind expanding, skill developing, purposeful, focusing, questioning loop improvement, a larger information awareness footprint, and etc. All of that to say, 400 podcasts ago, I thought I was a pretty bright guy. I thought I was pretty sharp. Thought I had my act kind of together. I'd done a few things. I knew a few things. 400 podcasts later, I realized that I wasn't a big deal. I wasn't that bright. I wasn't that sharp. I wasn't that did a few things. The guests have taught me how little I knew and how much I need to learn. And that's coming from a guy who has lived a reasonably full life. These kind of conversations challenge me. Afterwards, I always watch the show again. I'll be watching it again tonight. That is my after action report. As everyone knows, I'm super uncomfortable with podcasting. I don't like presenting my public mind to the public. I was a personal person. I was a private person. But I'm doing this because I know it's good for everyone and it's good for Shaun. I'm Generation 2.0 Shaun compared to 400 podcasts ago. I'm almost a new person. My central pillars are the same, but I have added so much ability from 400 podcasts that it's been a Christmas present for me. It's been a lot of work. I've earned it all, but I'm so glad that I committed to the process because the world has taught my inner world so much through all of these podcasts. So it was my job to listen, and sometimes it's my job to talk. But when I always reflect on it later that night, I wouldn't change a thing. All of the bad podcasts, all of the good podcasts, it's all been part of the journey of figuring out me and the world. And if you don't have these kind of things in your life to challenge you intellectually, to challenge you emotionally and spiritually, you've got to find a way. And I think that conversation or debate or challenging intellectual two-way highways is really a great way for certain people to improve in life.
Yeah. I don't have much to add. The only thing that I'm going to add on to that, I agree with you 100%, Shaun, in terms of what 400 podcasts has done and where this is going from here in the future. I think the one thing I took away, not only from this particular podcast, but from all of them, is that the best tool in the toolbox isn't a tool. It is the toolbox. Mm-hmm. It's the ability to have that toolbox available with all the tools that you get to put into it. So thank you guys, Chris, Seb, Shaun, Steve. Fantastic conversation. This has been awesome. So I can't wait to get a part 2 started out, perhaps, for this one. It's going to be great. And as we all continue to learn, build, and grow, we'll see you all next week.
Look forward to it. Thanks, bud.